Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ontario Science Centre's live stream. Today's topic, COVID-19 vaccines. Find out how they protect you from the virus. I'm so glad to welcome all of you here to this live stream. My name is Donna Francis, and I'm a researcher programmer at the Ontario Science Centre. I'd like everyone to help me welcome Dr. Peter Lynn. Hi, Peter.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. Dr. Peter Lynn is the Director of Primary Care Initiatives at the Canadian Heart Research Centre. He has a busy family practice in Toronto, and he's also the health columnist for CBC and has been actively tracking the COVID-19 pandemic since the beginning. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. This is a really hot topic. It's been almost 1 year since the first Ontario lockdown in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really interesting for us to be able to reflect on all the changes that have happened. Before we begin, today's discussion focuses on vaccines and their ability to protect us and to provide a light at the end of the tunnel from the current restrictions. It's a good opportunity also to reflect on the care and protection of the land that has been provided by Indigenous peoples. While our audience may be watching from different politically defined regions, we acknowledge that we are all participating in this event on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. Dr. Peter Lynn and I are speaking to you today from the city of Toronto. We acknowledge that the land we live on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Acknowledging the relationship to the land is an ancient practice. And today, as I reflect on the importance of time spent in nature as a way to cope with the pandemic stress, I express my gratitude for the opportunity to be here. And I thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land since time immemorial. These times are challenging, but they would be even more challenging without the respite provided by the air, water, and the time to spend in wonder of the natural world around us. Thank you. I'd like to bring the audience back in time to 1 year ago today, thinking about maybe where you were, what you were doing when you heard that we were going to be going into this lockdown. I want to ask everyone if you can write in the comments to reflect, what are some of the things that you've learned in this past year? I mean, a year ago, you probably knew very little about COVID-19, and now I think we all can say that we know quite a bit. Dr. Peter Lynn, can you share with us what your top 3 things are, perhaps, that scientists and doctors have learned about the virus?
Well, first of all, the virus is very good because it's been around for billions of years. In other words, viruses have been around much longer than we have. So they figured out what is the minimum things that they need to do to continue to exist. So what they do is they carry a set of keys that we now know as the spike protein. They also have a little chunk of the RNA, which is the blueprints on how to make that virus. And what they do is they use that to get into our house, the keys to get into our cells. They use our photocopiers to make copies of itself. And then they use us like an Uber to kind of get it to the next person. And then we transmit it across. So we've learned much about this virus and how it's very simple and yet it is able to spread to so many people and so many nations across the world. We also learned that we can actually defeat it by very simple things, right? For example, distancing, because the virus in the end can't fly, it has no wings and no feet. So it really needs us to get close to people. So therefore, the things that we do, which sound so simple, keeping the distance, having the mask on, washing your hands so that you don't bring the virus up to your face, those are all very simple things that we could do. I know it sounds kind of strange. It's so simple, even though this virus has done so much damage, but what we do actually makes a whole lot of difference. And that's one thing that I've learned, is that our behavior, we like hanging around with people, and the virus unfortunately uses that against us as we hang around people and share the virus, unfortunately. So I'm amazed at how far reaching this virus has become. And so therefore, I'm looking forward to when we could say goodbye to this particular virus.
That's wonderful. We've learned that it's a powerful virus and that there are steps through our behavior that we can use to defeat it. Let's start off with a few of the questions that we promised right from the outset that we would address. So these are some of the most common questions. The number one question is, how does a vaccine work? Can you explain this for us in some pretty simple terms? I know we have lots of school groups and some young kids watching. Can you let us know how a vaccine works?
Yeah, so the idea is to show you what the bad guy looks like. So it's kind of like a wanted ad. So this is what you're looking for, and it allows our body to have a chance to make some defenses against it. And of course, you've heard a lot of words like antibodies. So these are things that can go and grab onto parts of the virus. And so therefore, once we can tag the virus, your body's immune system, your army, can recognize it and then destroy it. So therefore, a vaccine is basically giving you a heads up. This is what the bad guy looks like, and please start making antibodies. So that way it gives you an opportunity to have all those defenses in place. So now if the virus does trying to come on board, come across your borders, you will have an army that's ready and it will take out the virus. So that's really the whole idea of vaccinations. And this is how we did it with polio, with smallpox. And that's why many of these diseases you don't see much of anymore, because we were able to protect people by giving their body a heads up. So in other words, allowing your army to have some lead time, some preparation time, so that they can be prepared and not be infected by the particular virus. Otherwise, the virus comes on board and your body has to just work very hard to try and figure it out. It doesn't have any extra time. And if the virus can move quickly, then it can cause a lot of damage before your army can put the virus down.
Thanks so much for that analogy of the wanted poster and giving our immune system this head start. Our next question is, are the COVID-19 vaccines different?
Yeah,
Can you
very
tell us
much
a bit
so.
about that?
Yeah, so the way they show you the wanted poster is different. So we learned very early on that the spike protein is important. So that's something that we want your body to recognize. So basically what they do is there's different ways of showing you that wanted ad. So the easiest way is actually you take the whole virus and then you just cut it up. In other words, you beat it into a little bunch of pieces and then we inject that into you. Now, the way of doing that is that it's very quick, right? You just grow the virus and then you make sure that it doesn't harm you and then you inject the parts into you. Now, the problem with that is that you're going to make a lot of army pieces and antibodies against different parts of that virus. And some of them won't be very useful and some of them will be very useful, but you're going to make a lot of different weapons against this thing. And so you have to take up a lot of resources. Now, the second way of doing it is we just show you the spike protein, the important part, the part that I really want you to recognize and make an antibody against it. So one way to do it is to grow that little protein outside in a laboratory. We put that along with something called an adjuvant, which is a booster. So that's the one that says to your army, hey, pay attention to this little guy. I want you to make antibodies against this thing. So those two things will be injected into you, and then your army will then have a chance to make those antibodies as well. The next way of doing it is they said, well, one way is to make everything on the outside of your body and then put it into you. The other way is to have your body build everything. So what we would do is just give you the blueprints on how to make that little spike protein, and then your cells will make the spike protein, and then your army will recognize that and then build an antibody against it. So then everything sort of happens within your body. So what can we inject into there are blueprints. So one set of blueprints is known as the messenger RNA. So this is the blueprints that goes to the little factories inside your cell, and that's where you're going to produce that little protein. And so by injecting that, we could teach your cells to make that protein, and then you can do that whole process within your body. The other way to do it is that we could use a piece of DNA, because DNA is the main blueprints that we have. So think of DNA, it's in the head office somewhere, okay? That's your nucleus, as you remember on your cell. So therefore, the DNA goes to the nucleus, your head office, then a photocopy is made. And that photocopy is the messenger RNA. So that's the copy of the blueprints that you then send to the factory, and then the factory can make the protein for you. So for those types of vaccines, basically they will put that little piece of DNA inside a cold virus. So a cold virus that you and I have gotten before, they will use that as a delivery truck. So by putting that little piece of DNA in there, the delivery truck will go in, deliver that DNA, then you'll start making the spike protein, and then you'll make antibodies against it. Now they're going to choose a virus, a cold virus that you haven't seen before. So that's why you might have seen that it's a chimpanzee virus. You're not going to become a chimpanzee, but they're hoping that you haven't seen it before. So therefore your body will let this delivery truck get through. Because if you've seen it, then you might say, hey, I recognize this virus and I'm going to take it out. So that's one of the downsides of that way of delivering it. Your body may recognize it and take out the delivery truck, in which case it may not be able to deliver all the blueprints and everything else. So those are the different ways of figuring out how these vaccines are, because you've heard lots of different names and things like that. So two things you want to keep separate. One is we make everything on the outside, and then we inject the wanted ads into you. The other one is we create everything on the inside. We give you the blueprints, and then you do all the work inside your cell. So that's one way of separating these things out. And you can imagine the amount of science that went into this, right? So lots of very smart people are working in labs, you know, the tinkering with all the beakers and everything else. So a lot of hard work went into all of this so that we can have all these different types of vaccines available to the rest of the world.
And it's amazing that there are so many vaccines that were developed. The next question is about how. How were these vaccines developed so quickly? Because really, this is record breaking. How is that even possible?
Well, you know how they say we stand on the shoulders of the giants that went before us. There were lots of people working in these different areas in order to study how that we can help people. Like it's all about helping patients. So the traditional way of making it, chopping up the virus, we knew how to do that one. In terms of making that little spike protein and then injecting it, we knew how to do that one as well for vaccines. The messenger RNA, that mRNA version, they were actually looking at using that idea to treat a lot of different patients that are missing a protein. Imagine if you had a disease where you're missing a particular protein, and because of that, you have terrible illness. So if I were to give you the blueprints, you could make that protein, and then therefore you wouldn't suffer with all those conditions. For example, let's say you're missing insulin. Wouldn't it be great if we can inject this and then you produce insulin from within your body? And so therefore you could do that. Now that would be fantastic. And that was really the dream of all the scientists that worked on this messenger RNA. Can we make these blueprints so that we can then give you different proteins that you're missing and treat many illnesses? At the same time, they said, well, we have this huge pandemic happening. We could make that spike protein and we could use this technology in order to help people to fight off this pandemic. And that's why we were borrowing the technology that they were using over there. And that's why it seemed so quick, because they had already worked 30 years to perfect this technology, how to make the blueprints, how to deliver the blueprints. And so these are the things that we're working on. For the vaccines where they're using the cold virus, they have used that to deliver things to try and fight cancers, for example. So imagine if you have a delivery truck that could get into certain cells, then we could actually deliver a payload to those cells. And you could imagine treating cancers, treating other genetic diseases where you're missing blueprints. We can again give you that. So really, we were borrowing technology that has been built up for many decades for other conditions. And we're just saying, can we, use their technology and their knowledge in terms of fighting this pandemic? And so that's why it became so quick. And remember, we had every smart person in the world, in the scientific world, working on this all at the same time. So it's like having a whole bunch of supercomputers hooked together. And that's why the advancements were so quick. So I think everybody was very happy in terms of how fast it came. However, in terms of safety, they did make sure that they did all the normal things when they're testing. So in other words, for vaccines, you have to test 30,000, 40,000 people. So they didn't skimp on that. They made sure they did all the proper studies. They tracked everybody's symptoms. You know, if you had a headache, you had to write it down that you had a headache. And so this is why we have lots of information as to what people can expect. We know that people will get some body aches and things like that. And we know that because they did very good studies to look for the safety side of the vaccine as well.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's really true. We had everyone really focused. I mean, that's the advantage, if there is any, of a global pandemic, is that there's a singular focus that happens. And my understanding is that that was cutting through all the red tape that would normally exist in terms of moving things from one process to another. It's really encouraging to know that all of the regular protocols and safety was followed as well. So this topic of COVID-19 vaccines has really, really gotten the attention of our viewers, and we have a number of questions. I don't think that we're going to be able to get through all of them, but I know that we're going to do our best. At the previous live stream that was about mental health and COVID-19, there were a few questions that came out there that we have now that we're going to start off with. And let's pull up the first one, which is, can children get the COVID-19 vaccine? And that question was asked by Karatbul, a grade 8 student, a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so for kids, they're doing the studies now. So initially, they focused on adults because they said, let us prove that it works well in adults. And then once they do that, then they can spread out and do studies in more people. Now, we don't expect it to be anything strange, but they want to make sure, does it work? In other words, produce these antibodies that we're expecting. And number two, is it safe for kids? Is there any strange things that happen? So right now, even as we speak, they're doing the study on kids. So that way they know, are they protected just the same? Is their immune system responding? And so we will have information soon on that. So once we have the studies that then say it's safe and that it produces the same kind of antibody protection, then you will see that the governments will approve it for use in children. So we're always very cautious. In other words, in, for example, pregnant women, there is now some studies looking at that as well, just to make sure it's safe. However, having said that, in Israel, for example, they have vaccinated 1,500 pregnant women as the last time they produced the data. So we will know whether they had any side effects, whether it worked well for them. So bottom line is that they're studying it, and then eventually the children will also be able to have it, just like the flu shot. We started off with adults and seniors, and then we worked our way down to the kids, and now kids can get the flu shot as well.
Right, and another audience question that we had in advance was, will some people be allergic to the COVID-19 vaccine? And that was asked by Esper.
Yeah, very good question. And right at the beginning, we did see people having allergic reactions, and there will be, unfortunately, because some people are just built that way. For example, if I give peanuts to 10 million people, I'm going to find some people that are allergic to peanuts, unfortunately, right? Or penicillin or anything like that. So there are some components within the vaccine that is like a carrier. In other words, that little messenger RNA, for example, has a little ball of fat around it to make it stable. But to make the fat hang out with water, they had to put some little molecules on there called PEG, and that helps it hang out with water and get around easier. Some people will be allergic to that PEG. So we won't know until we do the vaccine. So once we give you the vaccine, then we will know. And just like I don't know if you're allergic to peanuts until you eat peanuts, right? So it's the same kind of situation. So we will find some. But the US government, they've been tracking this. And the first time they put out data, they said we vaccinated 1.9 million people. And there were about 21 people that had the allergic reaction, the bad kind. And so the good news is that everybody did well. So they were treated. They did very well. And when they asked them, is it worth it? They all said it was worth it, that they still got the vaccine. So therefore, all the severe allergic reactions, all those people did very well. So when we start vaccinating millions of people here in Canada, we will find some people. So that's why we have rules about once you get the shot, we want you to wait. We wanted you to wait 15 to 30 minutes to make sure that there's no reactions. And most of the reactions happen during that time. If you're a very allergic person, then we want to look at your history. Have you had allergies to other shots and things like that? So we take lots of care. So that's why if you're going for your vaccine, there's a lot of questions about allergies and allergic reactions. If you have the, let's say ragweed allergy, that kind of stuff, that does not put you at higher risk of this. Because you're allergic to ragweed, you're not allergic to any parts of the vaccine itself. And so therefore the allergy is a small component, but definitely people know how to handle that if that were to occur.
Wonderful. We have quite a list, as I mentioned, of other questions about vaccines. So I'm going to start going through them. And many of these questions, I want to say thanks to the audience for sending these ones in by email, but many of these questions were asked by numerous people. So I've tried to make sure that the ones that were asked the most number of times are the ones that we're going to try to get to first. So there was a question about at what age can kids get vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine? I know you've addressed that the trials are going on now with children, but I think there was some interest in knowing the age of vaccination currently, and maybe even estimating when kids might be able to get the vaccine.
That's a good question. So for the when part, we have to finish the studies, and there are 2 studies. For example, for the Moderna vaccine, they have one study going all the way down to 6 months of age, and so therefore you'll be able to, if that all works out fine, in other words, they have the benefit, side effect is very reasonable, then you'll see them going all the way down to 6 months of age. So very similar to the kind of flu vaccine recommendations that we have. In terms of right now, so for Pfizer, it's 16 because they had some 16-year-olds in the study. For Moderna, it's going to be 18 years old. So most of them were adults, so 18 and above. So for the kids right now, let's just do the standard protection, which is the distance and the mask. I saw a lot of people writing down that they learned that mask is important, social distancing is important. And just remember, what you're trying to avoid is the breath of another person, because the virus will come out of me through my breath. The virus can't move other than through my breath. And so therefore you have to suck it in. So if we're face to face, that's when it's the most dangerous. So therefore we put masks on so that we keep the virus kind of to yourself so that it can't get very far away from you. And also the mask stops you from sucking in. In other words, for you to suck in the virus, that material kind of gets in the way. And so therefore you won't be able to suck in as easily. And so those are the things that we need to do. And if you're face to face in a tight situation, I tell people turn away. In other words, turn the back of your head to them, and now you're not breathing in their air. And let's say you're coming out of the washroom at school and it's really tight and you're going to be close to somebody and you're walking past each other. I tell them, just hold your breath, just hold your breath and walk past them. Because if you're not sucking in, then there's no virus that can move into your lungs. So by doing these very, very simple things, we could stop helping the virus move from one person to the next. And that's how we'll protect our kids, until such time that they get vaccination. And oftentimes I tell people the vaccine is your last line of defense. In other words, that means that the distancing didn't work and your mask didn't work, and then the virus is in your body. Then we need the antibodies to help you. So think of vaccine as being the last line of defense. The other 2 levels are important. So think of the vaccine kind of like a security system at your home, an alarm system. So just because you have an alarm system, I don't think you'd leave your door open and your windows open, right? You would still close the doors and windows. So let's keep up with the distance and also the mask. And then if you happen to get this shot, you'll have an extra layer of protection. But that's really quite close. That means the virus has actually gotten quite deep. So really, it's the 2 other levels that we need. And so therefore, don't fret that, if you're a child or if you have children that they can't get the vaccine right now, it's okay. Because if we do those things, we can keep all the variants and all these weird types of viruses away. Because no matter how these viruses mutate, we hear about these mutations, they can never fly, they don't get wings, they don't get feet, so they can never get across a physical gap, and they can never get through a mask because, basically you're slowing down your sucking power. So therefore the virus would have to be very close to you before you suck in. And so those are the things that we have to keep doing for ourselves and for our children as well.
Great, thank you. I see another question that came in recently that is asking about whether the virus can fight back against the vaccines that you take. And you were mentioning about the variants, and there's a lot of talk about variants, these slight tweaks in the viruses. Can the virus get better at defending itself, and can they become immune to these vaccines?
Yeah, it's interesting. We always give intelligence to the virus. So remember, the virus, there's no head office, there's nobody organizing this and saying, okay, you should do this to fight back to the humans. Basically, what the virus is doing is making millions of copies of itself inside me, for example. So now when it's making millions of copies, sometimes they'll make a mistake. And when it makes a mistake, if it's a good mistake, it'll help it get to the next person. So let's say it makes it transmit easier, then that virus will be successful. And that's the one that's going to make it through and become the dominant one. If it's a mistake that actually makes it worse for the virus dies. So therefore you won't hear from that one again. So basically what it does is it just makes millions of copies and it makes these mistakes that we call mutations. Now, sometimes the spike protein, what happens is that there's a mutation where there's a change in the amino acid in one particular spot. And the protein is made of a big pile of amino acids. And the amino acids look different. So they're different shape and they're different electrical charges. So therefore, let's say for simplicity, I take this little amino acid and I switch it to something else. So let's say it went from a positive charge to a negative charge. Now, all of a sudden, the antibody that's trying to stick to it, it needs to stick to a positive charge, but it's a negative charge. And so therefore it will repel. And that means the antibody can't stick to that spike protein anymore. And so that's how the virus can get around our defenses. And so that's why when you hear these mutations that they first saw in the UK and South Africa and those kinds of things, these are just single changes in these amino acids. So now the antibodies can't stick very well. And so that's why the antibodies won't be able to protect you. Now, if that virus gets to grow, that's the one that's going to jump to your friends and your family. And so therefore they will grow this one, which is now strong against that particular vaccine. So that's why we say, even though you've been vaccinated, we still want you to do the distance and we want to do the mask. So just in case one of these mutated version is around, it will still not be able to get over to you. I'm hoping that the smart people, all those scientists working on vaccines will now work on the second version, right? 2.0, so to speak. And what we're hoping for is that they'll target the stable area of the spike protein. So let's say you look at this big Christmas tree as a spike protein, the top might change and stuff like that. We don't want to target that. We want to target the part that never changes, the part that's the same from this virus to this version, to this version, to this version. And there has to be some parts that are the same because they need sort of roots, I guess, if you will. So if we can target that part, then that vaccine will then be good against all of the versions that will come out because that's the common area. So it's kind of like one vaccine will rule the world in that sense. So then and in that case, then we don't have to keep getting shots every year. If we keep making vaccines where it's attacking this part and this part keeps changing, then every year we're going to need a different vaccine. So I'm hoping that they'll work on this one sort of universal vaccine where it covers all of the variants. And that way, that would be very good. So one shot would then cover it for the COVID-19, all their mutant friends and everything else will still be covered with that. So that's what I'm hoping that they're working on. And I'm pretty sure they are working on that because if I can think about it, there's a lot smarter people that are working on these things that must have thought about it already.
That was another common question that I've seen come up, which was whether or not there's a likelihood that this is something that we'll have to get every year, just like the flu shot. And you're saying that you think that there's enough stability and that the scientists are working on the parts that are super stable so that ideally we only have to get the vaccine once and it would be good against all of these variants.
Yeah, because right now what we're doing is we're teaching your body how to make the whole spike protein, or we're injecting the whole spike protein into you. That's our wanted ad. So therefore, I don't really know which part your body will make antibodies against, right? Is it going to make it against the top, the side, the bottom, the back? I don't know. And in fact, that's what we see. When they look at the antibodies from different people in these studies, they make a bunch of different types of antibodies to different parts of the spike protein. So instead of giving you the whole thing, why don't we just give you the piece that is the same between all of these variants? So if we give you the same piece, then you will only make antibodies against that one little section, and you're not going to waste your time making antibodies against these ones that will then become useless. So look at where we came. Initially, we said, take the whole virus, put it into you, but then you got to make antibodies against all sorts of different parts. Then we said spike protein. And now what you're hearing me say is give me a piece of that spike protein, and then we just make an antibody against that. and therefore that would then take it out. Now imagine some companies now have worked on this where they make you an antibody. In other words, instead of waiting for your body to make the antibodies, we have antibodies. So they're working on, can we build an antibody for that part that's stable? And then that way we can take out the virus. So if you come in very sick with the virus, can we give you the antibody and lend you the army? Instead of waiting for you to build your army, let's just lend you the army when you're very sick. So these are the things that all these scientists are working very hard at. So even though the news looks the same, virus, number of cases, 1,000 a day, that kind of thing, lots of very smart scientists in the background. And I'm hoping this will inspire a lot of young people to become scientists. Because a lot of times you look at science, you say, what's the use of that? Learning this and learning chemistry and all this stuff and learning about charges and things like that. All of a sudden, all of this matters. And all of this is helping us solve the biggest problem that the world has ever faced in the last, let's say the last decade for sure, in terms of how do we get out of this pandemic. So all those nice, smart scientists are now very well respected. So I like that because it means that we're moving forward. And guess what? All this messenger RNA business and all the we're learning from that will help us reapply that information. Remember, it was meant to help other people with diseases where they're not making proteins. So this will advance that. So figuring it out for COVID vaccination will now allow us to figure out how do we make proteins for all these other patients that are suffering with other diseases. So it actually speeds up science very fast because we had everybody working together on the same project.
Mm-hmm. There's so many questions that are about what happens after the vaccine. Someone's wanting to know, if I get a vaccine, can I have play dates again?
Right. Yeah. So in other words, what can we do afterwards? The CDC in the US, those are the Center for Disease Control. They just released recommendations. And unfortunately, they said exactly what we wanted to hear, which was once you're fully vaccinated, 2 shots of the Pfizer, Moderna, or the AstraZeneca, then you are free to do many things. So they said that. They said that you can then hang out with other people that are fully vaccinated, and you don't need a mask, you don't need, distancing. You could be in the same room. You could go visit unvaccinated people. Even if you get exposed to COVID, you don't have to, quarantine or anything like that as long as you don't have symptoms. So it made it sound like once you're vaccinated, you're Superman and you could do whatever you want. And then in the fine print in the document, they said, by the way, people that are fully vaccinated, you could still get infected and you could still carry the virus to somebody else. And the reason why you could still carry the virus is because those antibodies are very good at patrolling inside your body, but it is not very good at getting inside your house, the little cells. So it's too big. It can't go into the cells. So if the virus is just quietly photocopying itself inside your nose cells, these antibodies cannot go inside the cell to get rid of it. And so therefore, the virus can still replicate and make copies of itself in your nose. So even though I'm vaccinated, so I'm good, I'm not going to get sick, I can now carry that virus to grandma. And if I hug grandma, I can now bring the virus very close to grandma, and then grandma might pick it up. So that's why even though you're vaccinated, we still want you to make sure that you're doing precautions. In other words, we want to make sure that you have, the distancing and the mask. So when you're visiting with grandma, we don't want you to be huggy all over the place. Now, if grandma is vaccinated and you really want to hug and you're vaccinated, can we do that? Well, I tell you the same thing, right? Hold your breath. So I now tell grandma, when little Johnny's coming in for a hug, hold your breath. That way you're not sucking it. So if we want to have that hug, maybe we could do it safely. For now, let's just make sure, because there's still too much virus floating around. So let's not go and hug grandma, okay? Because even though you love grandma and everything else, we don't accidentally want to bring the virus there. And my worry is that we can move these variants around. I know that the, public health has been saying the new mutants, there's only like 5 of them here. There's 140 here. But that basically that's the strong one, and that will be the one that dominates. And that's the one that soon you're going to see, like in the US, the one from Britain is now 40% of the viruses that they find down there because it transmits very, very easily. And so the concern that we have is that if we let down our guard, then we end up passing on that virus, and then the virus will continue to cycle, and then it'll continue to infect people. And remember, the one best way to get rid of mutations is to never get the virus, right? So in other words, if the virus can make photocopies, that's how it's making these mistakes. And these mistakes, if they're good, they will keep it. So you could imagine if we have 1,000 people with the virus making photocopies, we might have higher chance of making these mutations happen. And so therefore, we don't have to wait for some far off country to import one of these new versions. We can create it here because if we have these photocopies going on, then we can make these mistakes right here, right now. So that's why we wanted to cut down on the infection rates. And that's why, for example, here in Ontario, you heard them announce that they are thinking about vaccinating the hotspots. In other words, where the virus is moving and transmitting. Because up until now, we've been vaccinating the elderly because they're the ones that get really sick. In other words, they're the ones that die and get the horrible version of this thing. So it was very important to protect them. But then now what we're saying is that if we protect them, which is great, but we only have so much vaccine, then that means these people where the virus is moving around, these 20 to 40-year-olds kind of thing, are not going to get vaccinated until maybe the end of the summer, in which case they've now made lots of copies of the virus. Mutants can come. And then now if we have lots of mutations, then now the seniors that we have just vaccinated, we're going to have to give them another shot to deal with these new mutants that we've now created from this group. So therefore, one of the thoughts is, why don't we start vaccinating this group? Because if we can vaccinate this group, then we stop them from transmitting to their family and friends. And if we can stop them from transmitting, then there's less virus. Now, if there's less virus, then there's less need for hospitals, people going into hospital, and less need for that intensive care and the machines to help you breathe. And there's less risk of me bringing it to grandma in the long-term care nursing home because there's less virus out here. So I think that's a good strategy as well. And one of the crazy things that I was thinking about was why don't we vaccinate in the testing centers, right? Because all those people lining up for the tests, they've already identified themselves as high risk because they think they've been exposed to COVID. And most of them will be negative, thankfully. But these are people that have identified themselves as being potentially exposed. So that's why I think it might be a good idea that we offer them. So after they get that horrible stick up their nose, then basically they can go and get offered a vaccine as well. And that way we can protect them in the future. As far as where do we go from here, basically there are some crazy things that are happening. There are these rapid tests for your breath. So within 1 or 2 minutes, they look at the chemicals in your breath and they can tell whether you have COVID-19 or not. And so you could imagine that before you go to work or before you go to school, you blow into this little breathalyzer thing. It says yes, no, or yes or no to COVID, and then you get to go or not go. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking forward to as we head into the future. So it will be a new normal, but I promise that we will get back so that we can see each other, that we can have play dates as you were talking about, and make sure that it's safe for people. But for now, let's continue to share with each other, but do it safely. In other words, that distance, it's the face-to-face contact that's trouble because of the air. And if you can remember one thing, just avoid the breath of another person. Don't breathe in that air, and that will protect you. So I'll turn things back to you, Dawn. I've been rambling for too long. Never give me the stage because I'll just keep talking.
Well, I really want to thank you so much, Dr. Peter Lynn, for joining us, for sharing your expertise with us. It's been incredible. I know that there were so many questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, but I thank you very much for being able to answer as many as you did. Um, so thank you to you again for joining us. I'd
Thank you.
also like to thank the Government of Canada for funding that has made this event possible. And of course, I'd like to thank our audiences for attending, for asking questions, for sharing your personal experiences of the pandemic and your there are so many people who were able to respond with some incredible questions that I really wish we had a chance to get to all of them. But I thank you all for your participation and make sure that if you have a chance to survey that you do so because it helps us to learn about what your needs are and to be able to make sure that our upcoming live stream events are effective and helpful and enjoyable. So thank you very much, and we'll make sure to keep in touch with the Ontario Science Centre and find out about upcoming Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Donna. Thank you, everyone.